Hey, it's Mike here from MasterYourMix, and in this video we're going to talk about how to EQ your guitars so that you can get them to sound clean and polished. Now when it comes to guitars, there's a lot of different things that can be happening, and they can have a lot of noise, they can sound thin, they can have resonant frequencies, they can be really too boomy. So there's a lot of different areas that we have to pay attention to when it comes to guitars so that we can make them sound clear and fit inside of a mix properly. So what I want to do here is I want to take you inside of a mix, and I want to first play it without any EQ, and then we're going to talk about the various areas in the frequency spectrum with EQ that we're going to want to pay attention to. So first, let's listen to this track raw and without any EQ processing at all. So you get a sense of what it sounds like there, right? Let's listen to it in the context of the mix. And I'll pan it off to the left, and we've basically have guitar 1 and guitar 2, they're doubles of the same part. So let me pan this off here. Alright, so these guitars, they don't sound too bad, but what we're going to do here now is we're going to open up this EQ, and we're going to go into this guitar track, and we're going to start to really shape it so that it fits in the context of this mix. First, let's talk about the low end of a guitar. So when it comes to electric guitars, typically in the range of 150 hertz and below, that's where you're going to get a lot of low end rumble. It's kind of just noise that can mask the frequencies for the bass and the kick drum. So we want to make sure that we've cleaned up that low end so that we're not getting any of that rumble just ringing out through the track. Instead, we want to tighten up this guitar, make sure that it's clean, and that the low end is going to be occupied by our kick and bass, and then we've made a little bit more of a narrower range for the electric guitar so that it sits in the mix a lot better. So, like I said, 150 hertz and below, that's typically where this range is going to be. So I'm going to first play this guitar with the EQ off, and then I'll bring it in so we can hear what difference it's making. So when I solo it, you can kind of hear some of that rumble. It's not really adding to the tone or the clarity of the guitar. It's just kind of rumble. It's just noise that's getting in the way of making sure that our kick and bass tracks are nice and clean. So that's one of the easiest things you can do to just clean up your tracks. Just add a high pass filter. And typically what I'll do with it is I'll just bring in a high pass filter, and I'll start to move it until the guitar starts to sound a little bit thin, and then I'll back it off a little bit. So I'll just kind of dial it in until it starts to sound a little bit thin, and then I'll pull it back just a hair. And usually that's a pretty sweet spot, so you retain that low end, but you've gotten rid of all of the other noise that is unnecessary. So that's the very first thing you want to pay attention to when it comes to your guitars. The next thing you want to pay attention to is the top end. So typically with electric guitars, you're going to get a lot of amp hiss. And that's just noise that, again, isn't contributing to the tone or the clarity of the guitar, and it's likely going to be causing issues for the clarity of the vocal or the clarity of the top end with your cymbals. So we want to get rid of this noise as much as possible to make sure that our guitar tracks are clean. So we're going to use a low pass filter in this case, and typically with this low pass filter, you're going to want a low pass filter from about 8 to 9K and above. And doing that will get rid of that high-end hiss and noise that you don't really need. So let's bring one of those in, and let's hear how this sounds. So when I solo that frequency, you can really hear that noise there. It's not even tone. It's not adding any note value to this. It's just really noise. Let me solo that one more time so you can check that out. Definitely cleans up the top end quite a bit when we get rid of that top end with the low pass filter. So from here, now we have a couple areas that we want to pay attention to. So first, let's talk about the low end and the body of the guitar. So when it comes to electric guitar, typically in the range of 200 to about 350 hertz, that's where you're going to get the low end body and fullness of an electric guitar. So let's boost in this range here, I've got a boost already set at about 280 hertz, and let's hear how much body this adds when we boost this frequency. Definitely hear that as I add too much, it definitely starts to sound a little too weird and a little too low MIDI. So we just want to dial in just enough that we get a little bit more presence and fullness off the guitar. So in this case, about 1.5 dB seems to be adding just enough body to it. Now, you don't always have to boost in this range. Sometimes you're going to already have a lot of that natural low end in there. So you're going to have to pay attention to your mix to see what's necessary. Sometimes you might even need to cut it in this range. But it's important to note that this range of 200 to 350 hertz, that's where you're going to get the body of the guitar. Moving on from there, the range of 1.5K to 2.5. That's where you're generally going to get the bite of an electric guitar. This is where you're going to be able to get a little bit more attack off of your notes, and you're going to be able to make the guitar feel a little bit more forward in the mix. So by boosting in this range, it'll start to bring the guitar a little bit brighter in the mix and make it jump out a little bit more. So I've got a boost right now at about 2.7K, and let's listen to see what this does here. Now, when you boost in this range here, you do have to be careful that sometimes this can bring up some extra noise. It can bring up some resonant frequencies. So sometimes you have to play with the Q size, so the width of your EQ, to kind of feel out what sounds best. And if you're starting to add a little too much of that noise and you're going a little too wide, then you might want to narrow it down. So let's just play with this a little bit more. Definitely hear it adds a little bit of bite, gives it a little bit more clarity. You can hear the strums a little bit more as well. Then moving on from there, we have some resonant frequencies. So with guitar, typically in the range of about 3K to 5K, you're going to typically find some ringing frequencies that kind of add a little bit of cricket sounds to a guitar, or some whistling. And what you want to definitely do is use a narrow surgical EQ cut, and you want to sweep around till you find those frequencies, and then you want to cut them out so that you can really clean up the guitar. So typically, like I said, 3 to 5K, that's normally the range here. So I've got one happening around 3.3K. And let's listen to this. I'll take it out and then I'll bring it in and we'll hear what difference it's making, and I'll solo it as well so you can get a better sense of what we're listening for. So that's the frequency we're hearing. So it's subtle, but when you cut it, it definitely cleans up the guitar and gets rid of that kind of whistling cricket kind of sound and cleans it up quite a bit. So these are the typical ranges that you're going to want to pay attention to. So, you know, again, the low end range, cleaning up some of that mud from 150 hertz and below. From 200 to 350 hertz, that's where you're going to find the body of the guitar. From 1.5 to about 2.5K, that's where you're going to typically get the bite of the guitar. And then from 8K and up, that's where you're going to get a lot of noise. And then somewhere in that 3 to 5K range, that's where you're going to find some resonant frequencies, and you'll want to surgically cut those. So when it comes to guitar, those are definitely the ranges that you want to pay attention to. And like I said, you're not always going to have to boost or cut there. You're going to have to feel it out in the context of your mix to decide what's best for your mix. Sometimes your guitar track may already have a lot of top end, and it might sound good in the context of the mix, or might already have enough body and you don't need to add any more, or you don't need to cut it. It really depends on the tones you capture on the way in, but it's important to understand that these frequencies are where these characteristics of the sound applies. So now let me play this guitar with the EQ bypassed, and then I'll bring it back in so we can hear just how much we've transformed this guitar here with just these subtle changes. We're not even doing very much work here. We're just doing about 1.5 dB. You know, sometimes you need to go a little bit more, sometimes you need to go less. Again, it really depends on your ears and your taste, but let's listen to what this sounds like. So definitely when I bypass it, you can start to hear a lot more of that noise and the resonant frequencies happening in the 3K range. You can hear that just cleans it up, makes it sound a lot tighter. So now what I'm going to do here in the context of this mix is I'm going to duplicate this EQ and I'm going to pass this off to guitar number 2. Because like I said, remember it's just a double and pan hard left and right. And let's hear how this sounds in the context of the mix. And I'll play it with both of them with the EQ off, and then I'll bring it with the EQ in. Let me solo these guitars here. So there you go. That's how you would EQ an electric guitar to get a little bit more fullness and clarity out of it. And as you can hear here, I mean, these are pretty subtle moves. We only did about 1.5 dB, but when I bypass it and bring it back in, you can definitely hear that the mix starts to feel a little fuller and the guitars start to sound a little bit more forward in the context of the mix. And this is just EQ, right? We can definitely use things like volume to get a little bit more clarity and push things louder or quieter depending on our taste. But as far as cleaning up the guitars and getting rid of some of that hiss and making the guitars feel a little bit fuller so that the mix feels bigger, this is definitely the way to go. And again, it's just those specific frequency ranges that we covered here. So I hope you found that helpful. And if you're interested in learning more about how to use EQ in your mixes, then definitely make sure to check out MasterYourMix.com. And at that website, I have a free cheat sheet. It's called the Ultimate Mixing Blueprint. It's a guide to using EQ and compression in your mixes. And inside of that, we cover a bunch of different frequency ranges that you're going to want to pay attention to for various instruments. And if you want to go even deeper with it and you want to learn even more about how to use EQ in a lot more advanced ways, then you're definitely going to want to check out my EQ Primer course, which is also available at MasterYourMix.com. So hope you found that helpful, and we'll talk soon. Take care.